Now we've got the communications director for Obama's White House and the host of Pod Save America, Dan Pfeiffer. Dan, so good to have you back.
Hey man, good to see you.
Dan, let's start off with the stupid stuff first, and then we'll get into the more serious stuff. There was as if all of it isn't the stupid stuff, but
No.
there was a moment that went pretty viral where Marjorie Taylor Greene called for decorum in the House. Here's that clip.
The members are reminded to abide by decorum of the House.
Can I have your reaction to that?
I mean, laughter, pure laughter. I mean, talk about a massive case of lack of self-awareness to walk right into that, which I guess is what we kind of expect from Marjorie Taylor Greene these days.
Yeah, especially like just perfectly placed coming from the woman who is screaming liar at Joe Biden not 2 months ago at the State of the Union. So okay.
Exactly, chasing down Parkland victims to yell at them. Yeah. I mean, decorum and etiquette embodied Marjorie Taylor Greene.
That's right. Okay, so a big piece of news this week. Ron DeSantis made his 2024 announcement on Twitter. There was a lot of talk about how the announcement itself was bungled, and I took some momentary pleasure in watching both Elon and DeSantis sweat that out. But at the same time, that story in and of itself probably drew a lot of attention to the launch, even if only for how screwed up it was. Would you consider it a success or a failure?
It is an absolute abject failure. It's probably one of the most damaging unforced errors in modern political history. The launch is supposed to be the easiest part of your campaign. You have a speech, the press cover you, they'll write about your message. Even if you're a long shot, they'll take you seriously. It's one of the easiest free passes in politics. And DeSantis screwed it up every which way possible. And it's not just the technical glitches and like that stuff just kind of happens. Sometimes there's bad luck involved. The microphone goes out as it did for Tim Scott the other day. But even if this idea had been executed perfectly, it would have been an absolute disaster. Like, to what end? Why? Why would you ever possibly want to do an audio-only announcement being interviewed by two Silicon Valley billionaires to talk about their esoteric issues? It made no sense. It is illogical. He's on an audio feature on a text platform that no one really pays attention to. It's just bizarre, totally bizarre. I mean, just rank incompetence across the board.
One idea in terms of what he's trying to leverage is the popularity or the money or the power of Elon Musk. And I think Ron DeSantis's like war room, however official that may be, released a video later that day where it was one clip of DeSantis and one clip of Elon. And it was like a 2-minute video just trading clips of Elon. And like, you would think that they were one and the same, or that they weren't capable of discerning who those two people were from each other. But clearly they're trying to leverage some power, money, whatever it is in the whole Elon camp. But during that launch, Ron DeSantis was asked a few serious policy questions, and in virtually every case, he pivoted back to culture war when he was answering them. So it's basically just noun, verb, woke. That was his whole thing. Basically, a very 2008 Rudy Giuliani 9/11 vibes that we got there. But with that said, he is running in the GOP where really no one gives a shit about policy. It's all culture war and identity politics. So do you think his strategy is viable to win the party's nomination?
Viable-ish, I'd say. The culture war matters in the Republican primaries. It matters a lot. It's how Trump won in 2016. It's why it's continued to dominate the primary. The real question is, how does he distinguish himself from Donald Trump on the culture war stuff? Can he deliver that more convincingly, with more passion, more authenticity, more charisma than Trump? Because his argument is not, thus far, has been, I'm a more effective culture warrior than Trump. He talks about these things, I get it done. But that there's limits to that. And what I think he's really, really missing, and I think a lot of political observers are missing about Trump's success in the Republican primary, is he is the first Republican politician to marry culture war, right-wing, racist, homophobic, bigoted culture war stuff with economic populism. That it takes the place, in some cases, certainly that's some of the anti-immigration stuff, which sort of bridges those two things. But opposing cuts to Social Security and Medicare, railing about big business and corporations, even if Trump's policy agenda does not match that in any way, shape, or form, his rhetoric does. And so that has given him this strength. And DeSantis is trying to run on Trump's culture war agenda and Paul Ryan's economic agenda. And I don't see that working unless he changes.
Well, to that point, in what way do you think that Trump could lose to DeSantis here? Like, what would DeSantis need to do to unseat Trump as the presumptive Republican nominee? And is he doing it?
He's certainly not doing it yet. His campaign has been all downhill since the moment he won his big re-election victory in Florida in 2022 and sort of was lifted up as the Trump alternative among the MAGA candidates. I mean, I guess if you're trying to say, how is it possible that DeSantis wins? He does better than he is doing now. He's kind of reaches stability. He reminds some of these donors and activists and political leaders of the guy they thought he was a few months ago. And largely Trump collapses under his own weight, right? And that could be, at any moment Trump could dine with Kanye again, have another neo-Nazi over for brunch, could get indicted again this summer on another criminal case. There are other ones. We know the Jack Smith investigation into the Mar-a-Lago documents is heating up. Like, what does Trump look like 6 months from now when he's facing he's indicted on 3 crimes in 3 jurisdictions? The first trial is scheduled to start 6 days after the Florida primary. When you're going through on Super Tuesday, March 5th, there are pretrial motions, all this discussion of these things. Like, does all of that add up? Plus the combined weight of, maybe a couple $100 million in ads against Trump from DeSantis' side and all the other Republicans, does that bring him down? Not because Republicans are going to abandon him out of some moral outrage or policy concern or realize he's a liar, just they think he can't win because of all the baggage. Like, if DeSantis' argument is he's Trump without the baggage, does Trump get a lot more baggage between now and then?
All right, well, if you were in the Biden White House, who would you rather run against in 2024?
I honestly think you could argue that one round or flat. And I think it's very dangerous to argue it either way. Because the polling shows it's about exactly the same right now. And we should stipulate that any single Republican, Trump, DeSantis, Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, Glenn Youngkin, anyone you pick, a cardboard cutout with a scarlet R on their forehead is going to get to within a couple points of any Democrat. That is the nature of politics in this era with this electoral college. We should presume the election is going to be decided by less than 100,000 people spread across 6 states, as it has been the last 2 times around. And so maybe Trump is, Biden has beaten Trump before. You're going to argue against Trump. You'd say Biden's beaten Trump before. Is there a single person who had voted for Biden who's going to vote for Trump this time? Is there a single person who sat out the last election who's going to get involved for Donald Trump this time? Like, that would be the argument. And we know it's a known thing. Joe Biden has beaten him. Trump has also lost every single election in which he's been a factor since he won in 2016. Now, is DeSantis a more appealing version of Trump, or is he just Mitt Romney, right? Is he going to generate that excess turnout among working class voters in rural areas that Trump did, that sort of represents the difference between Obama's performance in 2012 and Trump's performance in 2016? I don't know. DeSantis thus far has not demonstrated anything resembling the sort of charisma, skill, nimbleness, character that it takes to win a presidential campaign. We know Trump has won one before, DeSantis hasn't. So it's hard to say. I don't think I'd be rooting one way or the other. And I think people who think they know the answer to that question are kind of forgetting how history has played out over the last 8 years here.
To the DeSantis point also, if it by some miracle did end up being DeSantis over Trump, then there's also the added factor of what happens to all of Trump's diehard fans. Do they just transfer right over to Ron DeSantis, or more likely, do we see some scorched earth thing where then Trump brings his people out of the political process to kind of stick it to Ron DeSantis? So all of those are kind of remain to be seen.
If 5,000 Trump voters in the state of Georgia decided not to turn out because they were mad at Ron DeSantis, that's ball game right there. Like, that's how much this is going to be decided on the margins. The other side, if focus groups, the Washington Post did this focus group of swing voters recently, all of them concerned about Joe Biden's age. Most of them would still pick Biden over Trump anyway. Does the age issue become more of a problem against a 40-something-year-old Ron DeSantis than a 76-year-old Donald Trump? Maybe, right? So it just don't know what the world looks like is going to matter more. I think the two things that matter more than who the Republican nominee is: what does the world look like? What's the economy look like? And is there a third-party candidate who is getting 2 to 5% of the vote in these swing states, which is going to make it much easier for a Republican to win, depending on who that candidate is?
What's become obvious here is that the way that Trump and DeSantis perceive victory, respectively, is to outflank each other on the right. They're moving toward all these abortions. Trump just recently took full credit for the Dobbs decision. Meanwhile, DeSantis passed his own version of a 6-week abortion ban. All the while, common sense would suggest that they're making themselves completely unelectable in the general election. Do you subscribe to that theory, or do you think that ultimately they'll run as far as they can to the right, and then for whatever reason, maybe people aren't paying attention, maybe it just feels like a reset, that they don't get punished for that in the general?
I mean, the voters who are going to decide the 2024 general election are not paying a lick of attention to the Republican primary. And so theoretically, taking the Biden campaign, Democrats, other outside groups can hang these positions around the necks of DeSantis and Trump. But their strategic logic is you can't win the general if you don't win the primary. So solve that problem first and then get to the next one. But, if you look at 2022, what is very clear is there is a price to pay for winning a Republican primary. The positions you must take to win that Republican primary will haunt you in the general. Does that mean they're unelectable? No. Does that mean they're less electable? Probably.
So I want to switch gears here to default and the whole issue of debt ceiling. I don't want to go too deep into this because I'm certain that, the moment that we finish recording this, something is going to happen that'll immediately render our conversation obsolete. But I will ask this. Republicans are using the U.S. economy as the hostage here in these negotiations. Why doesn't it seem to be getting through to Americans that Republicans are basically threatening to blow up the plane that we're all flying on right now? Is it because debt ceiling stuff, just writ large, is boring? Is it a failure on our part to message effectively?
I think it's three things. One, I think the markets, the business community, just sort of everyone has been operating with what I think is a somewhat naive assumption that this is going to get fixed. We've gone down this path twice. Both times we've avoided default. What generally would drive coverage on this is the market was dropping 800 points a day or 1,000 points a day over this. That has not been happening. So everyone just sort of thinks it's going to get fixed. Two, the press coverage of this has been offensively bad. It has treated this as a standard negotiation. The press has proved, not all of the press, but much of the traditional legacy media has proven once again they are culturally incapable of accurately covering a dangerously radical Republican faction. Because to point out what the Republicans are doing as extortion would be seen as taking a side. They prefer to be seen as balanced than accurate. And that has affected all of this. The third reason is, and this is a strategic decision from the president, is the president has once he started negotiations with the Republicans, he largely stopped making this case publicly. I believe he has made the calculation that it is better to get a deal to avoid default on the best terms possible than to try to win the messaging war in the short term, because winning the messaging war in the short term is going to make it harder to get a deal. Because any deal that he cuts is going to require a majority of Republicans to be on board, because otherwise, if it doesn't, McCarthy cannot bring it to the floor, or he will lose his speakership. So he has made a decision. I think this is maybe a little bit of chess in a world of checkers, is to say, I'm going to take a bunch of shit right now, probably going to get to kind of define the short-term press coverage over it. I'm not going to score a bunch of political points, but I'm going to get a better deal through being amiable publicly than being aggressive publicly. And I don't know if we can judge the wisdom of that strategy until we see how this actually plays itself out. But up until the moment those negotiations around a budget deal started, the president was very aggressive in making the case about the Republican position here. And then he he stepped back in favor of this approach, and that may be the right choice. We just don't know yet.
Although the flip side of that is that created a vacuum that it usually creates when we don't have anyone on the offensive, and so everything is filled with even Kevin McCarthy trying to completely flip the narrative to make it sound like the radical socialists are now trying to get in charge, which is obviously like his play on the whole far right extremists who are dictating the terms of all of this conversation.
Yeah, it's like the House Democrats have had a bunch of press conferences. Senators are out there. People like you and my folks at Pod Save America, we've tried to make the case, but nothing can fill the void left by the president when the president's in charge. Like, that is just the reality of it. Barack Obama was in the exact same position in 2011 when he was stuck in the same menu of shitty choices that Joe Biden currently has, and we'll see how it plays itself out. I am very sympathetic to the people in the White House that there is no good option here, and they're just forced to choose among a bunch of things. Going to be pretty painful, but hopefully we'll avoid what would be an absolute catastrophe substantively and politically, which would be default. I
believe you've spoken about this on Pod Save America, but there are a lot of people asking why not just invoke the 14th Amendment. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, I am not. This is almost a shock, but I am not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert. All I know is what I read about the 14th Amendment, but it seems at best case, the arguments around the 14th Amendment are a legal jump ball, right? You have not put aside like the partisan experts. Some of them believe it's right. Some of it believe it does not, that the debt ceiling is not in conflict with the 14th Amendment. But practically speaking, here is the problem for the Biden administration if they do this. One is it lets the Republicans off the hook. It's now the president's choice to try to avoid default this way. You've now taken the entire fate of the global economy and you've put it in a court system filled with Trump judges who, as we just saw in the abortion medication case, will make insane decisions. Ultimately, that will wind its way up to the Supreme Court, which is rigged, a corrupt Supreme Court, rigged by Mitch McConnell and the Federalist Society. But even from a very practical matter, the way you pay your debts is you sell bonds, right? That's how we get more money. Institutional investors and foreign, like investment funds, et cetera, and pension funds and foreign countries. How could you sell debt of legally questionable value? Like, who would buy that debt? Just from a pure practical matter. And it is not as simple as just the president going out and saying, I evoke the 14th Amendment as if he is like a wizard at Hogwarts. Like, it's not a magic spell. What happens is we cross the X date, the United States sells more bonds, and when the Republicans sue, you respond in court that the reason you did it is because you believe the debt limit statute is in conflict with the 14th Amendment, and then you put the whole thing in the hands of the court. And so there would just be a massive amount of economic turbulence. This is one of those things where I think the people who've been asserting that the president do this with such confidence are a little bit playing sort of the domestic political version of the game Risk and not really reckoning with the real consequences. If you're President Biden, it's not, put aside the politics of like who would win in a messaging war over this. It's just, do you want millions of Americans to lose their jobs and the stock market cut in half on your watch? Like, that would take decades to unwind. And you're going to do that on a legal theory that your own lawyers can agree on. So I just think it's not particularly practical, even if it seems quite appealing.
That makes total sense. And the way that it has to be done is in such a way that it would already be too late to fix it if and when they render their verdict, make their ruling. So again, to your exact point, the whole thing would just be put in the hands of a 6-3 conservative court that probably would love nothing more than to see Biden's entire presidency fall apart. So, I agree with you there. Tom Carper has announced his retirement in the state of Delaware. As everyone knows, you are one of the most well-respected sons of Delaware. Do you have any announcements that you would like to make right here on this show?
Yes, I do, in fact. First and foremost, I live in California. I'm a resident of said state. But more importantly, is that Delaware
that hasn't stopped quite a few people before, but go on.
That's true. That is true. Just as a point of fact and a point of reference, I live in Northern California. But second is that Delaware has, because it's a small state, has one congressperson. That congressperson is Lisa Blunt Rochester, who everyone expects to run for Senate in Tom Carper's place. I certainly hope she does. If she is elected, she is will become the only Black woman in the United States Senate. That would be an absolute huge thing for Delaware. It'd be great for the Senate. She's awesome, and so I fully endorse her candidacy that I hope will be coming very soon.
What I'm taking out of that is that there's a chance that you would run for Congress. Fill that void in Congress.
We'll conference my wife in, and we'll talk about this later.
Dan, tell me about Crooked's new subscription community.
It's created a community called Friends of the Pod. It's a really amazing program, a way to engage deeper with Crooked content, to engage deeper with other Crooked listeners and fans. There's a Discord server. John, and Tommy, myself, other Crooked personalities get on there. There's a show called Terminally Online that is quite fun, that is available to for subscribers. You can go to Crooked website and check it out. I highly encourage it. I did that show the other day, and Terminally Online, we each pick one piece of content that we engage with that made us question whether we're too online. Mine ended in the most recent episode with me going quite deep down a lot of rabbit holes around the Vanderpump Rules Scandival situation. It's quite funny. It's quite good. Lots more things coming. It's a great way to contribute money to Vote Save America and a whole bunch of other things. So I encourage everyone to check it out.
Yes, and I was also on Terminally Online, I believe, like a few weeks back. It's super fun show. Definitely,
yeah, it's a great show.
Definitely recommend it. And I'll put the link in the post description as well for anybody looking to join. And finally, Dan, as you know, I joined Tommy on for our bi-weekly show on YouTube called Liberal Tears. It's a ranking show, so we'll rank top 10. Tommy does seem to really be leaning into it. Do you have any message for him as he seeks to dethrone you as Crooked Media's YouTube star?
Well, I would say welcome to the party, Tommy. You started this company like 6 years ago, and I'm glad you're finly engaging with video media, video content. Up until now, you've basically been Ron DeSantis-esque in your exclusivity for audio. I think the show's great. I'm glad he's riding your coattails. Like to see Tommy. Tommy did a show on his own before you, and I would just say it did not do as well. So I think we know who brings the juice to the table here.
Well, I'll add nothing to that. I'll just let your words speak for themselves.
You will neither confirm. You will not agree nor disagree publicly.
Confirm nor deny. Although I'm sure Tommy will have words to throw back. So
I'm sure he will. Yes.
Yeah, we'll leave it there. All right, Tommy. Floor is yours. Your response to Dan Pfeiffer.
Eat shit.